and writing for graduate students and research. She's relatively recently gotten her PhD and has expertise in diversity and equity education. And I'm going to turn it over to her and let her tell us about specific aims.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and it's good to see all of you today. Just to add on a little bit about me, I've also served not only our researchers at the Denver campus for CU, but also at the Anschutz Medical Campus in my time here at CU. And that's actually how I got connected with GMAP, as we are also members of the GMAP 3 group as well. I'm also a technical writer in background and a proposal writer. So I bring that sort of approach to understanding and teaching specific aims writing. So with that said, I'm going to get to it. First, I have to bring up my presentation. Give me a sec. Put it in the mode. All right. Can folks see this presentation? Cool.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So as we get started, I wanted to give you kind of a lay of the land of what I have planned for you today. So as you saw advertised, we are planning on this being a workshop. And even with some of the challenges that Zooms bring to interaction in this particular format, we are going to do our best to make this a workshop. Certainly the second part of our time together, we will be in breakout rooms and you will be working on your own specific aims with a thought partner. But before I get ahead of myself, we're going to begin just kind of giving some context on the specific aims, kind of walking through the geography of the specific aims page. I'm going to offer some tips and strategies. We'll walk through an example. And then I have created a specific aims checklist that I will be sending out to all of you or through Maria when we're done. And I'm planning on us building on this checklist as we go through. So that will be part of our workshopping together. So I'm hoping that our experts in the room will be joining us, and even our non-experts in the room will be joining us and helping to provide other things we should add to that checklist. Since we're together for an hour and a half, I am planning on a short break before we go into those breakout rooms that I mentioned. But with that said, what I'd like to do is first off, acknowledging the folks who have lots of experience writing specific aims in the room, and then also folks who are just getting started perhaps on writing specific aims. I want to invite all of you to at any time jump in, unmute yourself, or use the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with, to share your own experiences. I find that when I do these talks, if folks who have been doing this a long time jump in with their own anecdotes and lessons learned, it creates a better learning environment for all of us. So if I start talking too fast, please feel free to interrupt me, and I will try to be mindful to take some breaths here and there so that you can find a place to jump in. So let's go into it. So I like to begin with the context for specific aims, simply because as a technical writer, I realize the importance of understanding how documents are used, not only how they are read. And I think that gives us some important clues for how to then construct a competitive specific aims page. So once upon a time, before we were in a pandemic, NIH reviewers in study section would often gather in an actual room together, and they did not wear masks, and they would discuss a variety of proposals that had been presented to that study section. So for those of you not familiar with the study section process, when you submit a proposal to the NIH, It will go to a particular study section that is made up of 30 to sometimes 40 people, and one primary and one secondary reviewer will be assigned to your proposal, and perhaps a tertiary. Those two people will read your proposal in its entirety. However, everybody else in this room who has not read your proposal in its entirety will still be submitting scores on your proposal. They will be doing that based on what the primary and secondary person is telling them, as well as what they are able to glean from your specific aims page that will pop up on their computer in the few minutes that your proposal is being reviewed in study section. So I give you this context to just realize the power in the specific aims, and to also realize sometimes it is expected to stand on its own in some ways. Sometimes that is the only thing a reviewer will look at before they submit a score on your proposal. The other place that specific aims can be used, and they kind of are used in standalone, is in working with program officers to get feedback early on in the proposal process. So when you reach out to a program officer to see if a program is a good fit for you, to see if a study section might be a good fit for you, you're going to want to have a one-page specific aims page to send to them so that they can get a sense of what it is you're doing. You always want to have that specific aims page ready to go before you reach out to a program officer, because chances are the moment you reach out, they're going to ask for a one-pager on your project. So you can use it in these couple different ways. Certainly it is used by reviewers to kind of judge your proposal, sometimes in and of itself, along with what your primary and secondary and sometimes tertiary reviewers are saying, but also to use it as a tool, as a conceptual paper for your project as you're vetting it with program officers. What was I going to say? I can't remember. I'm sure it will come back to me. Let me pause here to see if I have anybody who wants to jump in with their own thoughts on the context of specific aims pages.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I am on the NIH kind of RFA, and where do you find the PO contact? Where is that hidden?
You should be able to find it on the program announcement.
Okay.
Usually there are contact details.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you.
This is Janet Ingram. I just would say I have been on study sections, many of them, and that specific aims page can so either grab your attention or you're like, kind of thing. So it is just probably the most important piece of information, because it really does sort of grab that reviewer and pull them in, or they're just frustrated and they go into your review with that type of attitude. So.
Thank you for that. And I remembered what I was going to say. Most reviewers report deciding or knowing if a proposal is going to be good or not based on that specific aims page. Most report that they know as soon as they get through the aims page if it's going to be good or bad. If it's bad, there's probably very little coming back from that. You have to write a good proposal in its entirety. You can still kind of sink your chances even with a great specific aims page. But if the aims page is not great, it's going to be hard coming back from that. Thank you. All right. So let's look at the geography of the specific aims page. Now, I like to think of the specific aims page as, what's the word? Real estate, thank you. Sorry, real estate is the word I'm looking for, where it is really the front door to your proposal, but then even in and of itself, it's valuable real estate, and there are different sections where we can really capitalize on the value of the specific aims page. So I'm going to give you kind of break up this specific aims page into sections. At the very top, in that first 1 or 2 paragraphs, you're going to intro your project, and you're specifically going to talk about how bad the problem is that you're trying to solve with this research. This is what really, we'll talk about this in a second. This is really where you're trying to hook reviewers and get them to feel a sense of urgency around the research that you're doing. You're also going to give them some background on what's been done already, fill them in with the cutting edge research, and identify the gap in the research that your project is working to fill. Then you go into giving a brief description of your project and offering your overarching hypothesis. Now, the NIH still tends to favor hypothesis-driven projects. So I encourage PIs to find that overarching hypothesis for your project and make sure that it's in there so there's clarity around what is the intent of this project at the very beginning. You're then going to state your aims. I suggest that you state each aim very briefly as an objective, and then give a brief, like 1 to 3 sentences describing what that aim is. And then in the end, coming back to the vision for your work. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go, but it's really important to hit your reviewers very hard before they leave your specific aims page with what is possible once you do this research. So you want to come back to the vision, put the icing on the cake of the specific aims when you're all done. Very often I find our PIs will kind of fade out in their specific aims with logistics or other details that aren't that important and don't need to be taking this valuable real estate within the specific aims during that area where you could be talking about the vision of this research. So I'll pause again to see if there are other things that folks would point out in terms of this sort of geography or real estate of the specific aims. So as I mentioned, I did want to dig a little deeper into how you make your case, especially in those first couple of paragraphs within your specific aims page. So I mentioned already the importance of creating that hook. Oftentimes that is showing how big your problem is. I recommend using statistics to show exactly how big your problem is. And I also encourage folks to think a little bit outside of the box. Certainly, in your field, there is always going to be health outcomes and health disparities that need to be remedied, and that is part of your hook. But you can think broader. Do you have an economic case that you can also make? How much does it cost to do the way we're doing things now? How much might we save if we start coming up with new ways of doing things? Think very broadly about all the ways your research can impact the society even more broadly, and that will help you kind of create a more comprehensive case. After you've done that, then you want to spend time bringing your reviewers up to speed on what is the latest, what is the most cutting edge research happening in the field right now. Don't assume that they all know exactly what's happening. It doesn't take reviewers getting too far outside of your exact expertise to get lost in, I didn't read that article, or I didn't see that come out, I'm focused over here. So you want to make sure that you are speaking very broadly, using as plain a language as you can to show that cutting edge research, and also find ways to position yourself in the cutting edge research. not only are you trying to show reviewers that your project is awesome, and it is the one that needs to be funded, but you're also trying to show them that you are the perfect person to do this research. You have to also position yourself as the right person to do this research. If it's a great project, but they have doubts about whether you can do it or if you're the right person to do it, then chances are you won't be competitive with your proposal. So once you've set that cutting edge research, you've given them sort of a quick lay of the land and positioned yourself within it, then you identify the gap in the research that your project will help to fill. Now, not only do you need to identify the gap, but you have to explain why this gap and why now. And that's how you sort of set yourself up in this critical need that I have as this fourth bullet point. You don't want to make any leaps in your specific aims because the risk is too great that the reviewers will not be able to make a leap with you. So make sure you walk them through each step of how you get from here to here to here, and don't assume that they know exactly why this gap is the most important to fill now. I'm going to walk through an example, but I'll pause for a second to see if there's questions or comments from anybody. Okay. So here's an example of the first few paragraphs of a specific aims page, focused particularly on food insecurity and how it relates to obesity and diabetes interventions. So I have put it in different colors based on these four concepts that we just discussed: the hook, the known information, the gap in knowledge, and the critical need. And let's walk through it together to see how the PI has sort of framed it. I need to move the little pictures around so that I can see it. Okay, so we'll start off with the hook. More than 14% of US households are food insecure or at risk of going hungry because of the inability to afford food. About 21% of households with children are affected, as are more than a quarter of Latino and African American households. 1 in 8 US households is now enrolled in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. Now, I like this hook. I think they do a good job of showing how many people are affected by what they're going to research. My couple of critiques on this hook is that we don't know what this project is about, and actually it feels a little bit of like a bait and switch because the hook they've created isn't the whole story. They're also looking at the connection between food insecurity and obesity, and we haven't heard anything about that within this hook. So I would advise the PI here to first off, state what this project is about. I've seen this pretty nicely done by PIs, and they just make it almost like a title. They bold it as the first sentence, and then they launch into the hook. It can sometimes feel a little awkward to launch in with your hook and then be like, by the way, this is what the project's about. So I like when PIs start with that sentence. So I suggested that this PI might make their title or that opening line say, targeting food insecurity in obesity/diabetes interventions. Real quick, we now know what it's about. Reviewers have reported getting more and more annoyed the further down they have to read before they know what a project is about. And you think about a reviewer experience, they are going through all of these proposals at a time. They have many assigned to them at one time. So they need to very quickly understand what this is about. Yes, they want the exciting hook there too, but they want to know right away, what is this project? And then when they're coming back to it to remind themselves of what you wrote, again, they want to know right up front, what is this project about? So I would advise this PI to include those things. So then they move into the known information, and I won't read all of this, but they give us some background on the connections and the research that has already been done that is connecting food insecurity with obesity and hypertension interventions. So they do a decent job of that. They also position themselves well. If you look at this last green line, they say, my recent work has demonstrated that food insecurity is independently associated with a higher prevalence, blah, 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 blah. So they have now set themselves up as, I'm already doing this research. I'm already doing this work. It's natural that I take the next step in this research and continue with this project or with this to fill this gap that I've identified, which they have highlighted then here in red. However, a number of crucial questions remain. This is our gap. Does food insecurity predispose adults to obesity or diabetes? Does food insecurity alter self-management capacity, making diabetes management more difficult, et cetera, et cetera? Then after they have done that, they move into the critical need of this research. They bring it back to, okay, how many people are suffering from this experience? This is where we really get into the hook that I think we needed right up front in that blue section. But they bring it back and explain why we need to be looking at this right now. And they do a nice job of creating a sense of urgency, I would argue. My one critique for their sort of final section here, this critical need, is that this is where I would probably state a hypothesis for the research project. And they have stated an objective, which I think is good, but I think they could have easily stated it as a hypothesis. So let me pause there to see if anybody else has questions or other things they see jump out of them in this little sample.
Well, this is Ron. I'll just say that, I reviewed for both Heart, Lung, and Blood and NCI. And usually as a reviewer, you end up with 6 to 9 grants. So the grants that are written in the way that Naomi is showing, they're much easier for a reviewer, and the reviewer can pick out what they like and what they don't like. So I really like this style of presentation. The other thing I wanted to mention was in that room where you have 40 people, there are probably about 25, either clinicians or basic science researchers. And the other 15 people in the room are all statisticians. They only read statistics. They do not read, more than your Ames page, even if they're interested. They just want to see, in what kind of depth that you've described the statistics and the statistical parts of the application.
Thanks for that, Ron. And I think that also speaks to the diversity of perspectives we can expect on those study sections, and then the importance of using very clear and plain language when we can. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is I have created a sample specific Ames page. Now I want to be clear, I made this up and it is a silly example of a specific Ames page. What I want to do though, if I can do it quickly, is I will share it with you all so you have the document itself. I will read through it just to make sure we're all on the same page. But let me see if I can, well, I already shared it once. Let's see. Now I've lost everything and I'm showing you all of my files. That's not what I wanted to do. All right. Let me try this again. Okay, so I've shared a PDF with you that you should see in the chat and be able to open there. Now I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. We have to go through everything quickly. Hopefully while you're opening that, I can zip through. Apologies for this not being as smooth as I had imagined. Okay. So let me go ahead and read this. Can everybody see this specific aims with the purple image? Perfect, thank you. All right, let me go ahead and read this and you can look at it here or open it in the chat. So over 50 million people in the US suffer from allergies each year, and this number is only growing as people become more and more sensitive to allergens. Allergy research to date has only been conducted on matter that can be seen, even if only through a microscope. Yet this research has long ignored matter that cannot be seen, including dark matter. Dark matter is theorized broadly as dust-like particles that cannot be seen because they do not reflect light as regular matter does. Physicists further theorize that whereas visible matter makes up approximately 10% of the solar system, dark matter makes up 30%, embedded within the evidence of Sarcostratitis at y equals blah, blah, blah. Thus, the threat of dark matter allergens is particularly ominous. This essential research will focus on the hypothesis dark matter, e.g. detritus oscurus, is currently producing undetected/undistinguished allergic reactions in the most sensitive of people. To fully assess this hypothesis, our team of specialists will study dark matter allergic reactions in our mouse model using the following aims. Aim 1, dark matter allergens will be detected. Using our mouse model, we will identify allergic reactions when there are no visible matter allergens. We will thus know that this was a dark matter allergen affecting the subject. Aim 2, the distinct nature of dark matter allergens will be analyzed. Dark matter allergic reactions differing from those reactions to matter that can be detected will be closely analyzed by our team. Aim 3, diphenhydramine will be developed. Understanding the differences between allergic reactions, diphenhydramine, the popular allergy relief medicine known as Benadryl, will be developed to make it effective in the treatment of dark matter allergic reactions specifically. The next time you sneeze and there are no noticeable particles of dust or pollen about you, you may be reacting to a dark matter allergy. This very important research will ensure that there are remedies for you. Our team consists of allergy specialists, physicists, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, and pharmacists. Our interdisciplinary team will work collaboratively towards solutions. So before I kind of pull this apart, I wanted to open it up to see what feedback any of you would give me on my specific aims page. Particularly, what am I doing wrong?
I don't see any rationale or how you're going to do things.
Oh, yep, you're right. I forgot that. All right. I'm going to start going through and picking out other things that I think I should have done better. But again, please interrupt me as things come to you. I know I'm throwing this at you quick. So the first thing I want to look at falls under this principle of primacy and recency. So this rule of primacy and recency tells us that people remember what they read first and what they read last the best. So going back to this idea of the specific aims page as real estate, we know that the very first couple sentences and the very end sentences are the most important and are the places where we really want to get the most bang for our buck. So let's see how I did. So up at the top, over 50 million people in the US suffer from allergies each year. It's not bad. I started getting at the problem of showing how big a problem allergies are. So it's not a terrible start to the specific aims. But what concerns me more is down in the bottom, I've really just kind of wasted space here by describing who the team is that's going to do this research. And I really missed my opportunity to come back to the vision. What's possible if I do this research down the road? What's my next step? How am I inviting the reviewers to see what the vision of this work is? Instead, I just offered some logistics that I would argue aren't particularly important. So when you're working on your own specific aims, make sure that you haven't neglected particularly those last few sentences of your specific aims. In the ones that I review for our researchers, that's one of the top issues that I find, and one of the top pieces of feedback I give to folks is to make sure they bring it back to the vision at the end of the specific aims.
Can I jump in? This is Jenny. I
Please.
have a question. So
Yeah.
what if, so we just sent in a proposal to the American Cancer Society, and they had, you had a specific aims page, but it was a little bit pre-described, like you had to have these sections. And so the last section was kind of how the project was going to fit into the center. So it's not exactly the way you wanted to end it. So what do you, but at the same time, I know as a reviewer, when people change up the template, it always confuses you because you're like, okay, I'm supposed to be seeing this, but I can't find it because they've moved it or something. So what do you do with something like that?
Yep, that is a great question. Thank you for that. So always follow the guidelines given to you by the agency, first and foremost. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of strategies and tips. I recommend you throw all of them out the window the moment that the agency has said, no, we want this, 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 and this in this order and in this way. You do it exactly that way. You aren't going to get points for creativity from reviewers or from the agency if you try to get fancy. Now, with your example, Janny, I would see if there was an opportunity to weave a vision in responding to what they, so, you know, if they're looking for you to end with how it fits into the agency or to the ACS in this instance and what their priorities are, I can see that actually turning out very nicely if you weave in the vision with what the goals and visions are within the Cancer Society as well. And then I had a question over here. Yes. Naomi Ruth, I love that name. Do you recommend a figure in the specific aims? I've never seen one in a specific aims page. Yes, thank you for that question. So I'm going to dig into this, or we were going to talk about this a little bit later, but let's talk about it now. So I recommend including a conceptual diagram of your research project if you can create a simple and clear one that gives folks a sense of the whole project right there in the specific aims page. I think it's particularly good if you remember how these specific aims pages are used, and that diagram can give somebody real quick a good understanding of what this whole thing is about, which that's really your goal, is getting them to have a sense of the project as quickly as possible. One of your goals. So I recommend that you do it, and you do put it in the specific aims page. I had one researcher who had reviewed for dozens of years say to me, or say to a group that I was working with one time, that he had never seen a successful project that did not include an image in the specific aims page. And when he said that, I mean, he had been doing it for decades. He said that, and I realized he was in a particular area of research. I think he was a microbiologist. But when he said that, I latched onto it, and I was like, that's pretty impressive if somebody doing this sort of reviewing for the NIH for this long says something like that. So if you can create one, I recommend it. And I don't know if our colleagues have other things that they've seen, if they would say yes or no. I've also been argued with over this by the Associate Dean for Research in our School of Public Health. So I defer to experts on it.
Yeah, Ron, Janie, how often do you see a figure in your specific aims that you review? I haven't reviewed, so I don't know, but I also know that I've never added a figure to a specific aims page, and I've never actually seen one in my field. You're muted, Ron.
So I'll talk while he's trying to figure out.
I got it.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I would say, you know, I'm one of the older members of the group here. And back in the old days, you would never see a figure on the aims page. But there's increasing number of grants that have, you know, and it has to be really a catchy figure. And I think it kind of goes along with the hook. If you can get somebody to hook and put their eyes onto your figure, and then they can see how aim 1, aim 2, and aim 3 fit into that, you've really done your job. So I think in the end, you know, maybe about 25% of grants have figures on the aims page now.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is like this one, I'm old too. I can't really see it that well. So the font and that kind of stuff. So if it detracts that way. So, but at the same time, I know I have seen, I don't see too many, but I have seen like a block diagram or something, this to this. It really doesn't pop. So you really have to think about what you're putting right there. Cause I think it can go one of two ways, right? The reviewer can be like, oh, wow, this is so crystal clear, or you've just made me angry. Because I can't read it. I think it's silly, you know, whatever. So you got to be really cautious, I guess. That would be my thought.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, Janie, that also brings us to this cardinal rule of grant writing of thou shalt not annoy the reviewer. So absolutely. And I appreciate you pointing out how small the text is in my figure. Not everyone's going to be able to read that. I think you probably need better than 20/20 vision to actually read the text that I have included in this figure. So I would recommend either making the text bigger or losing it altogether. So you have to walk that line.
Naomi, this is
Yes.
Francine. I just wanted to add that I've rarely, if ever, seen a figure in the specific aim section, but I think it's imperative to include one in the approach section simply because it gives an overview of what it is that you're proposing to do. You can include your timeline, your sampling, your intervention, just the flow of your project. And as a reviewer, those are like diamonds to me. I mean, I look for them because it really helps me to understand And I've actually had a mentor tell me that if you can't draw your project on a single page to kind of organize how everything flows and fits together, then you're not going to be able to narrate it. So you almost have to visualize the steps of the project and be able to illustrate that within your approach section. And I think those are really, really important to include.
Yeah, no, that's so well said, Francine. Thank you for that. I think it definitely needs to be in there somewhere. Whether or not you decide to put it in your specific aims or not, that's up to you. But yeah, it really comes down to that picture is worth 1,000 words. And I really do think that you want to make sure it is worth 1,000 words, but once it's there, and you can create a simple diagram, it also helps, I think, in terms of clarity of thinking. And as you're writing, I think it also serves as a tool to kind of help you. I'm a conceptual thinker, so I will start drawing something if I'm getting mixed up in how I'm writing something. So you can use it in that way as well. Thank you for that. All right, let me see if I can get back to my arrows. There we go. All right, let's look at a new thing. This principle, show, don't tell. So what I mean here is it is important to show that your research is important, but it is not helpful to tell people that your research is important. So in my example, I have used quite a bit of hyperbole. Up here, I explain that this is essential research. But as Matthew pointed out, I didn't even say what the research was exactly. So that's not going to help me by just telling people it's essential. And then down at the bottom, I say that the research is very important, and I don't stop there. I also bold very important. Now, this is kind of a joke example, but I have integrated common errors I see PIs make, and I do see folks say things are very important and bold it. I have seen all of these things that I'm doing in other examples. So don't say it's very important. Definitely don't bold that it's very important. Just show how it is important. That is what you're trying to do. Another important thing to do is to define your terms. Now, I'll say, and I've kind of noted this already, it is important to cut out the jargon wherever you can, especially in the specific aims page, but I argue in grant writing altogether. If there's a way to say something plainly, say it that way. You will not have a reviewer who is upset because you didn't use more complex language. I have never heard of that before, but you will get reviewers upset or annoy them, breaking our cardinal rule, if you are using language that they're not familiar with. So make sure that you are defining things. Do not use formulas in your specific aims page. Save those for the methods section or a more appropriate place to lay them out. I, of course, just made up a formula that makes absolutely no sense. And I made up some words myself. The other thing to remember is if you do need to use some jargon, because sometimes it's unavoidable, make sure that you are defining it and then using it consistently. I've also reviewed grant proposals where the PI will start using a piece of jargon in one way and they might define it, but then they start using it in a different way later on in the proposal. And I get lost, and in theory, other folks will get lost as well if you start using it in different ways. We all know jargon within our fields can be used in different ways, but you need to make sure you're using it consistently after you defined it.
So I don't know if you're going to talk about acronyms.
Yes, please.
So just like Naomi said, I mean, there's a whole sort of range of people that review these. And so don't make the assumption that people know all your acronyms in your specific subdiscipline. And that's another thing. I mean, when you have to go searching in the proposal, where did they define this? And often it's not defined because it's just assumed, maybe US, we all know that's the United States, but you really want to be careful. I know with chemists, they like to use, our wonderful symbols of chemicals, and that's like you see AS and you're like, what are we saying there? What's going on? So it really does frustrate people. And I know it gives you more space because you're not writing these things out. So if you're using them a lot, then yeah, it makes sense to define them. But if you only use it like once or twice, just write it out, so that would be a suggestion, because I know it makes me crazy when I'm like, I have no idea what FLT is or whatever.
I agree with Danny, one of these anecdotally, so we have a lot of arsenic researchers, right? And the chemical symbol for arsenic is AS. And when a student or I or anybody uses AS, arsenic, at the beginning of a sentence, now it's like hard to read and you get hung up every time. So I try, if the space permits, to write out arsenic, to write out whatever compound is being used, especially with those kind of not so friendly symbols.
No, these are great tips. And the one thing I'd add that I think Jenny was also saying is you might want to redefine those terms and or acronyms or abbreviations throughout. We know reviewers don't tend to start on page 1 and go all the way in the same order that the proposal's presented to them. They're jumping all over the place. Some reviewers start with the specific aims and then they flip to the budget to see what all is going to be in there. Some folks are like, I go immediately to the methodology. It doesn't matter what else is there. So knowing that they're going to use your proposal in different ways, I suggest redefining those things in each section, actually, if you can do it. All right. So we've already talked about visuals, what to do and what not to do, make sure that that text is readable. The other thing that I would highlight, and I think I had a question over here about, how much space to include for the figure. So I would say the amount of space I've used here is acceptable. You might get, of course, you can't read it, so I'm going to need to do something differently than what I have right now. But about that amount of space, maybe slightly bigger would be okay. I also did a poor job of setting a good boundary on it because I have all of this blank space right in the middle there that is not necessary. But on the comment or on the thought around space within your specific aims, I'd like to share that, as somebody who reviews specific aims pages for a lot of different researchers, I frequently get them emailed to me and I open them up, and sometimes they are one solid block of text. And my technical writer heart just breaks as I look at this wall of text that I'm going to have to deal with. And I take a deep breath and I dig in. And I bring up this rather dramatic example of me reading a wall of text, just because you have to think about, how does a reviewer feel when they open your proposal? Like, if it is one solid wall of text, that's going to feel a little deflating, or I feel exhausted looking at those things as a technical writer. So give them some visual breaks, even if you say, no, I can't do an image. I can't come up with something that's going to be useful in the specific aims to break it up that way. Give them a little space between those paragraphs. In my example, I haven't given a lot of space, but I've given some so they can see where things are breaking. And the other thing I would suggest is, research has shown it is easier to read something that is not justified on the right. So you see on the right how I have sort of this jagged edge. It is easier for people to read something that has the jagged edge on the right. Now, I know a lot of PIs fight me on this because they're like, I love the beautiful straight edges on both sides and I can't give it up. And I'm like, Okay, but then I have them try it. I have them read something that is right justified, and then I have them read something that is jagged, and usually they say, actually, that is easier to read. So I'm able to convert some people. So I urge you to consider leaving that edge jagged, because it is easier to just follow the lines than when it's right justified, even if it's a nice clean look. So I'll pause there to see if anybody else has tips or tricks or questions related to space and visuals.
Yeah, I have a question about the whole use of bolding and or italices. I mean, I've seen, you know, a lot of people like to do a lot of it to the point where you're just like, okay, we're bolding, you know, I mean, but what works well, I guess.
Yes, thank you. That is a great question. And Sheila, I see your question in the chat as well. So what I recommend is to use bolding, italicizing, and underlining sparingly. You know, I think it's fine to use some of it, and it actually does sometimes do a nice job of kind of making things stand out. What I urge PIs to think about, though, is that the point of bolding something is to draw your reader's eye to it. So take a look at what you are asking the reader to focus on. So for instance, in my example, I have bolded only very important in the last paragraph. That is not going to be useful to draw my reviewer's eyes to where I said something was very important. And I see it done in a lot of different cases where people draw someone's eyes to what they're going to tell them, or setting themselves up to tell them the important thing, like bolding the word hypothesis instead of the hypothesis itself. I would actually recommend either bolding hypothesis and the hypothesis itself, the word hypothesis and the hypothesis itself, or just bolding the hypothesis itself. Where do you want your readers' eyes to go? And is it really worth kind of pulling them away from starting at the beginning and having them kind of like flip on through to get to what you said was important through that bolding? So those are kind of the two things to keep in mind. Is that it gets very distracting if you start using especially all of them and a lot of it. Okay, let me see. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for answering that question. So yes, always use the margins required or recommended by the agency. And in this case, I guess it's 0.5 inches. Okay. So one of the last tips on this particular example that I'll give you is the importance of using active first-person voice in the specific aims and in proposal writing in general, again, unless the agency has specified otherwise. Now, in case you don't remember the rules from grammar class about what is active first-person voice, I'll give you an example. So something in passive third-person voice would be, the research will be done by the research team. If we make that into active first-person, it is, we will do the research. The reason that we want to keep it in active first-person voice is, one, it is easier to read something that is an active first-person voice. And secondly, it tends to take less words. So I have translated my aims from the example from passive voice, where I sort of fluctuate actually between first and third person, to active first person voice. And you can see that it got quite a bit shorter. And I oftentimes will do this for my PIs. I will start shortening their sentences and turning it into active first person voice. And I'm able to save quite a bit of space, sometimes 2 or 3 lines per paragraph, if I'm able to do that. So move it into active voice. I'll give you one example. Let's see here. So first off, I mean, even just the way I stated my aims initially was in passive voice. Dark matter allergens will be detected. I should just say detect dark matter allergens. That's the aim. That's aim 1. Easy. It makes it clear, easier to read, easier to understand. Any questions or comments on switching? And try to do it consistently. I have a lot of PIs who will be good for a while, and then I'm halfway through the proposal, they move back into third person passive. And then that's inconsistent. So then I'm reworking later on.
So how do you train yourself to be in active mode all the time?
You know, it takes some practice. I think it's one of those things that you just need to go through and catch. So if you know that you tend to kind of switch into passive third person voice, and I understand that many researchers and scientists were trained to write in passive third person because it sounds objective. But knowing that it is easier to read in active first person and acceptable by the NIH, you really want to go through and rework it. So it's kind of knowing where you tend to fall or where you default, and then revising it, having colleagues look through and say, if you catch any passive voice. I mean, I always use, like, if I see will be, that's kind of my red flag. I'm like, uh-oh, if it's gonna will be, if we get will be in there, probably we've slipped into passive voice. So you just look at those the different verbs and helping verbs that you use in the passive voice, and that can help. And you could even do a search on it in that way to start catching it. That's a great question. All right. So as we kind of wrap this up and move into our section, and I'm a little behind, I think, but that's okay. I wanted to just offer this specific AIMS checklist as sort of a starting point. I believe that, let me just go through it quick. I believe that we have touched on everything so far. One thing I haven't mentioned, I don't think, is it's important for your specific aims to be cohesive, but to not be interdependent. The NIH does not want AIM 2 to be dependent on AIM 1 succeeding or turning out the way you expect it to. Because what if it doesn't? Then your project cannot move forward. So they will look for those sorts of things. At the same time, you don't want your aims to look scattershot. You want them to come together and create a cohesive project. So make sure that your aims are cohesive but not interdependent. And I think I caught everything else. Before we take a quick break, does anybody have things they would add to our list right now? Okay, we will come back to it and add to it as we go, but let's at this point take, let's take about a 5-minute break and come back. So it's what, 3:35 for you when we come back together, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms to share your own specific aims pages.